Hi. In this video series, we will be introducing you to the group project this semester, the Website Critique and Redesign Memo. And we will also take a quick look at the cover memo to it as well. So, for this student sample review, we're going to take a look briefly at two different cover memos and a fairly close look at a solid critique memo sample. To begin with, as this particular assignment is a relatively new one, the cover memo requirements have been somewhat in flux, and the sample we are going to look at followed an assignment prompt that did not require some of the things that you will need to do, and also that you will need to include in your own group cover memos. With that in mind, we can scroll down through this first cover memo assignment to get a fairly good idea of what your instructor will be expecting. The portion that is missing on the other memo is the requirement to discuss the different responsibilities each member took, followed by any updates to the project or project plan since the group last communicated with the instructor, as well as what the group members each individually actually accomplished. This was something that every student was required to do individually in the group evaluation memo that you need to do right after you complete the assignment. As you just learned from the main assignment prompt for this project, there's quite a bit to do in that memo already, and so this hopefully will alleviate much of that burden from every individual by incorporating it into the group project as a collaborative effort instead. So as you see in this memo, this team briefly recounts the rhetorical situation they created in the original proposal and the project detail section, and discuss how they went about deciding what each team member should do and how they were to divide the work among themselves. When evaluating the individual grades for these projects, that is the type of information the instructor will need to know in order to be fair if there is a discrepancy in rating any individuals in the group. The next two sections are a before and after picture of the planned division of labor between each individual group member and what they actually did. You can see how valuable this will be not only to the instructor but also to any group member who initially agreed to accomplish certain tasks and then failed to do so. If that is the case, they will probably be expecting a reduction in grade of some sort because they failed to live up to their obligations to the group. As we scroll down further, the next section is titled Alteration. And like a good follow-up analysis to any visual chart or data you present in a report, this section provides a textual explanation of the difference between what tasks were planned for each individual at the beginning of the project versus what needed to be modified or changed because of the situational demands as the project moved forward. And then finally, this group provided a general description of the audience, purpose, and context, or the rhetorical situation of the project via second and third level headings, although it probably could have been introduced more effectively and perhaps in a little bit more detail. The basic information is here and quite intact and usable for the instructor's purposes. So let's get out of that one and take a look at the one that we want to review. So we next turn to the project we will look at fully, which was done by a group of 4 in a regular classroom. It is very unlikely, by the way, that any of you will be in a group of 4 in an online course, especially one with a condensed schedule if you're doing it over the summer. As mentioned in the intro to this assignment, the group size will most likely be targeted and limited to 3 members. One more thing to remember before getting started in our review of this student sample will be that the requirements for the live person-to-person courses have been reduced somewhat in the online version of this particular assignment as far as these collaborative projects are concerned. It is just a matter of logistics and not a reflection of your abilities, however. That said, this sample will be somewhat more involved than the critique memos you will create because the requirements per group member were higher than the ones that will be required of you. You are required to have 2 major suggestions for improvement of the website per group member, whereas students were required to have 3 to 4 major suggestions or the equivalent for this particular project. there were also 4 students working on this, and you will only have 3. Okay then, if we look at this memo, we will see that the group has created a fairly cohesive document here, at least as far as the main intro and first level heading structure is concerned. As we see in the second full paragraph of the intro, the general topic and subject overview that is presented in the first paragraph is followed by a content forecast, which does a good job of naming all the first level heading titles in the specific order that they will follow in the remainder of the memo. So here we have group proposal, we have evaluation of home page. If we go down, evaluation of home page, evaluation of academics, and so on, all the way to a conclusion of the evaluation. And we get a conclusion of the evaluation. So if we move to the first section, group proposal, we see that this group was only required to do a much more general description of the changes they made in their initial proposal than the group that did the cover memo we just looked at were required to do. And this group only needed to do the barest explanation of how they divided up the tasks within their group in the cover memo. As mentioned earlier, this part of your memo will need to be more involved and detailed in comparison to this particular memo here, and will likely look more like the first one that we reviewed. The remaining sections of this cover memo, however, detail out the rhetorical choices and strategies employed by each individual section of the group's actual critique memo, and follows the logical pattern by discussing each major memo section of their document and critique one by one. In the first section, they look at the evaluation of homepage section. We get a sense that they had previously discussed this section in a progress report and meeting with their instructor, and here are presenting the result of the revisions and changes that they made to their critique memo as a result of those meetings and their own self-evaluations as a group. This probably also explains for the contrast and discrepancy between the content of the 2 cover memos. You will also notice that there are second level headings here, as well as there were under the group proposal section previously, that aren't really forecast or set up in the textual introductions of the section. So what I'm talking about here is that this is the section intro, and there's no forecast for rethinking overly critical stance, comparison with UP, etc. This cover memo is of the size where a writer will need to make a decision about the point of diminishing returns for creating completely functioning cohesive textual forecasts of the second level headings to follow. What I mean is that there comes a point where the material that you are presenting will actually be less involved than the cohesive forecast you would need to create for it to forecast it. As a business communicator, you will need to determine when exactly you reach that point, especially in a document such as this, and free yourself to use headings that should function as usable devices on their own without the need of any forecast. Obviously, this group decided that they had reached that point in this cover memo, and although I may have not reached the same point as quickly, and others may have reached it more quickly, I believe their argument here is a valid one, and that this document functions fairly well at the level it is without the use of completely cohesive forecast mechanisms in the section intros here. Whoops, that was a little bit off target, but it was a good discussion to have nonetheless at this point in the semester and your development as business communicators. The trick with this is if you aren't going to use completely cohesive intros, which occasionally the rhetorical situation will demand that you do not need to do this or you should not do this. You will want to redouble your efforts to make sure that the headings that follow are very descriptive so that they do take up the cohesive slack. To get back to the task at hand, if we continue rolling down through the cover memo, we can see that this group has done a pretty good job of guiding their instructor through the rationale behind their rhetorical choices and the application of the rhetorical techniques they have implemented in their memo for the assignment. It's pretty good work here. As an instructor, this type of detailed analysis and information by a group or a student and a cover memo is extremely helpful. Your instructor will need to know information like this in order to properly assess how well you are working and responding to the rhetorical situation and demands.